A young man left prison on Christmas Eve with nothing but a key to a place he'd never known. What he found there wasn't an inheritance, it was a reckoning. And maybe, just maybe, a second chance. If you're here because you know what it's like to stand at a crossroads with nothing but ghosts in your pockets, hit that subscribe button. We tell stories for people like us. The air outside the gates of Northwood Juvenile Correctional Facility had a different taste. For 2 years, every breath I'd taken had been filtered, recycled, tasting of disinfectant, sweat, and simmering regret. This air on Christmas Eve morning was sharp and clean, so cold it felt like swallowing tiny shards of glass. It hurt, but it was real. The guard, a man named Miller who'd never once used my name, just my number, pushed a thin manila envelope into my hand. "Good luck, kid," he said, the words as hollow as the clang of the steel gate shutting behind me. Luck. That was a word from a different language. Inside the envelope were the standard issue items for a freshly minted 18-year-old ward of the state. A bus ticket to a town I'd never heard of, $87 in cash, and a formal letter stating that my obligation to the state of Wyoming was fulfilled. Tucked behind the letter was another smaller envelope, yellowed with age. It had no return address. My name, Leo, was written on the front in a shaky, unfamiliar script. Inside was a single, heavy, old-fashioned skeleton key and a folded, brittle document. It was a deed to a property in a place called Redemption, Wyoming. The name of the owner listed was Arthur Vance, my grandfather. A wave of something cold and bitter washed over me, colder than the wind. Arthur Vance. The man who hadn't written a single letter, made a single phone call, or shown up for a single visiting day in the 2 years I was locked away. The man who had vanished from my life the day my parents died, the same day the fire took everything. Now, from beyond the grave, I'd been told he passed a year ago, he was sending me a key to a place I didn't know, in a town I'd never heard of. As if that could somehow stitch together the years of silence. The bus station was a bleak, concrete box smelling of diesel fumes and desperation. I bought a coffee that was mostly hot brown water and sat on a hard plastic bench, watching families greet each other with hugs and tearful smiles. Christmas carols piped through a tinny speaker overhead, mocking the gray slush outside and the hollow ache in my chest. I clutched the key in my pocket, its metal teeth digging into my palm. It was the only solid thing I had in the world. The $87 felt like a joke, a countdown timer to my next failure. The bus ride was long, a journey through a landscape of white and gray. Snow-dusted plains stretched into an indifferent sky. I watched the miles roll by, each one taking me further from the only life I'd known, and deeper into an unknown that felt less like a future and more like a void. My reflection in the grimy window was a stranger's, a boy with a man's haunted eyes, too thin in a threadbare state-issued jacket, his face pale and tight. 2 years of staring at concrete walls had bleached the life out of me. What did he want? My grandfather, why leave me a property, a final, cruel joke, a burden to saddle me with? My mind cycled through the possibilities, each one darker than the last. Maybe it was a ruin, a pile of rotten wood he couldn't get rid of. Maybe it was his way of saying, "You're on your own, just like I left you." The bitterness was a familiar warmth in my gut. It was easier to be angry than to be scared, and I was terrified. The bus groaned to a halt in what I assumed was Redemption. It wasn't so much a town as a suggestion of one. A single main street was lined with squat, false-fronted buildings, their windows dark. A diner with a flickering neon sign, a dusty general store, and a bar with a faded beer logo were the only signs of life. The bus pulled away, its red taillights disappearing into the falling snow, leaving me utterly alone. The silence was absolute, broken only by the whisper of the wind. I checked the address on the deed against the peeling paint of a street sign. Black Creek Road. It pointed out of town into the growing dusk. I pulled my collar up, hunched my shoulders against the wind, and started walking. The walk was about 3 miles, each step a small battle against the cold and the rising panic in my throat. The town lights vanished behind me, and I was swallowed by the immense, empty darkness of the Wyoming countryside. The only light came from a sliver of moon, casting long, skeletal shadows from the bare cottonwood trees that lined the road. Finally, I saw it. A rusted metal gate, half off its hinges, hanging open like a broken jaw. A faded wooden sign nailed to a post read, "Vance Ranch." The letters were barely visible beneath the snow and grime. Beyond the gate, a long, unplowed driveway disappeared into a stand of pines. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The punchline to the universe's long, unfunny joke. The house was a shadow against the snow-covered hills. A 2-story farmhouse, dark and imposing. It looked less abandoned than asleep, dreaming of a time when it was alive. The porch sagged in the middle, and a few shutters hung at odd angles, but it was still standing. Solid. I climbed the porch steps, the wood groaning in protest under my weight. The front door was imposing, its paint cracked and peeling. I hesitated, my hand shaking as I pulled the key from my pocket. It felt ancient, a relic from another time. For a moment, I was sure it wouldn't work, that this was all a mistake, that I'd come all this way for nothing. I slid the key into the lock. It was stiff, resistant. I put my shoulder into it, turning with all my weight. There was a loud, grating click that echoed in the silent night. The sound of a tomb opening. The door swung inward on a long, mournful creak, revealing a darkness that seemed to swallow the faint moonlight. A wave of cold, stale air washed over me, carrying the scent of dust, old wood, and something else, something like forgotten memories. I stepped across the threshold, out of the biting wind and into the belly of the beast. The door swung shut behind me with a final, definitive thud, plunging me into absolute blackness. I was home, or I was in my grave. At that moment, I wasn't sure there was a difference. My eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom, finding faint outlines of furniture draped in white cloths like a room full of ghosts. I fumbled along the wall, my fingers searching for a light switch. They found one, a small stiff toggle. I flipped it. Nothing. Of course. The power would have been cut off years ago. I pulled out the cheap disposable lighter I'd bought at the bus station, its tiny flame a pathetic weapon against the oppressive darkness. In the flickering light, the room came to life. It was a living room, frozen in time. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, its mantel thick with dust. The shrouded furniture looked like sleeping giants. I moved deeper into the house, the floorboards groaning under my boots, each sound unnervingly loud in the profound silence. The flame danced, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to move just at the edge of my vision. My breath plumed in front of my face. It was almost as cold inside as it was out. The kitchen was next. A thick layer of dust covered every surface. A calendar on the wall was turned to November, 3 years ago. A coffee cup sat by the sink, as if someone had just set it down and walked away. It was an unsettling diorama of a life abruptly paused. I opened the pantry, hoping for a miracle. All I found were a few cans of long-expired beans and a box of stale crackers. Better than nothing. I tore the box open and ate a handful. The dry cardboard tasted a welcome distraction from the knot in my stomach. I needed to find somewhere to sleep, somewhere to escape the bone-deep chill. I made my way upstairs, my lighter held high. There were 3 doors. The first opened into a small, simple bedroom. A bed with a bare mattress, a dresser, a small nightstand. The second was a bathroom, the porcelain of the tub and sink stained with rust. The third door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. This room was different. It felt lived in. A large, sturdy wooden desk sat under a window. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with dusty hardcovers. A worn leather armchair sat by the desk, an indentation still visible in the cushion. This must have been his room, my grandfather's study. A strange mix of resentment and curiosity warred within me. This was the space where he lived while I rotted in Northwood. This was the chair he sat in while he chose to ignore my existence. I ran my hand over the dusty surface of the desk, leaving a clean streak. My fingers brushed against a small rectangular object, a silver Zippo lighter. I picked it up. It was heavy, solid. I flicked it open. With a flick of my thumb, a strong, steady flame erupted, bright and warm. It felt like a small act of defiance, of ownership. With a better light, I started to search. Not for anything specific, just for a sign, an explanation, anything that would make sense of this bizarre inheritance. I pulled open the desk drawers. They were filled with old pens, receipts, and mundane paperwork. Nothing personal. I moved to the dresser in the bedroom. Empty drawers. The closet held a few flannel shirts and a pair of worn work boots, all smelling faintly of sawdust and Old Spice. It was like he had packed a bag and left, intending to come back. Defeated, I sank onto the edge of the dusty mattress. The house was a tomb, a monument to a man I barely knew and deeply resented. Leaving me this place wasn't a gift. It was an anchor, chaining me to a past I desperately wanted to escape. I was tired, a deep, soul-crushing exhaustion that went beyond the cold and the hunger. I lay back on the mattress, not bothering to look for blankets, and pulled my thin jacket tighter. The Zippo was still in my hand. I flicked it on again, watching the flame dance. It was the only warmth, the only light, in a world of cold and dark. As my eyes grew heavy, I thought about fire, about the fire that had destroyed my life, the fire they said I started, the fire that made me a monster in the eyes of the world. And as I drifted into a restless sleep, I wondered if this cold, dark house was my punishment, or if, somehow, it was the only thing left that could save me. I woke to a sliver of gray light filtering through the grimy window. My body ached from the cold, and my stomach growled, a hollow, painful cramp. The first day of my new life. It felt depressingly similar to all the days of my old one. I had to do something, anything, to feel like I wasn't just waiting to freeze to death. I went back to the kitchen, my movements stiff. In the daylight, the dust was even thicker, dancing in the sunbeams like malevolent sprites. I remembered the cans in the pantry. Expired or not, it was food. As I rummaged through the shelves, my hand knocked against a loose board at the back. It clattered to the floor, revealing a small, dark cavity. My heart gave a small, hopeful leap. Money? A secret stash? I reached inside, my fingers closing around a small tin box, the kind that old men used to keep tobacco in. It was cool to the touch. I pried it open. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton, wasn't money. It was a single, folded piece of paper. Another letter. The handwriting was the same as on the envelope with the key. My grandfather's. I unfolded it with trembling fingers. The paper was thin, almost translucent. The ink was faded. "Leo," it began. The sight of my name in his hand sent a jolt through me. It felt too intimate, too personal, after years of silence. If you are reading this, then you've made it home. I know you have questions. I know you're probably angry. You have every right to be. There's so much I need to explain, and I'm sorry that I have to do it this way. I'm not a man who was ever good with words, and I'm even worse with goodbyes. Know this first, I never stopped loving you. Not for a second. I had to stop reading. The words were a physical blow. Love? What did he know about love? Love didn't abandon a kid in the darkest moment of his life. Love didn't stay silent for 2 years. I crumpled the letter in my fist, the anger a hot surge that momentarily chased away the cold. I wanted to throw it, to burn it, to scream until the silent house shook. But I didn't. My fist slowly uncurled, and I smoothed the wrinkled paper on the dusty counter. As much as I hated him, I needed to know. I needed an answer. Why? I continued reading. This house, this land, it's yours now. But it's more than just property, son. It's a story, and it's a choice. There are things you need to find here, things that will tell you the truth. Not just my truth, but yours too. Look in my study. The desk is where I kept my business. But the heart is somewhere else. The heart of this place is in the work. Find the barn. That's where the real work begins. Be careful, be smart, and please, forgive an old man for trying to protect you in the only way he knew how. Arthur. The barn. The letter was a riddle, a treasure map. A part of me, the cynical, institutionalized part, scoffed. An old man's sentimental nonsense. But another part, a smaller, younger part that still remembered his grandfather's calloused hands and the smell of hay and leather, felt a flicker of something else. Hope? No, that was too much to ask for. It was curiosity. A reason to keep moving. I finished the last of the stale crackers and went outside. The world was blindingly white. A fresh layer of snow had fallen overnight, blanketing everything in a thick, pristine shroud. The air was still and cold, the silence vast and profound. The barn was about 100 yards from the house, a huge, looming structure with a sagging roof and faded red paint. Its great doors were shut tight, held by a thick rusted chain and a heavy padlock. Of course. Another locked door. I searched for a key, but found nothing. Frustration boiled up in me. I kicked at the door, the wood groaning but holding firm. I circled the building, wading through knee-deep snow, looking for another way in. A broken window, a loose board. Near the back, I found it. A small service door, its frame rotted. I gave it a hard shove with my shoulder. The wood splintered, and the door swung inward with a screech of rusty hinges. The inside of the barn was cavernous and dark, smelling of hay, manure, and damp earth. Light streamed in through cracks in the walls, illuminating swirling dust motes. Old stalls lined one side, empty and silent. A hayloft loomed above. A dark maw. In the center of the barn floor sat an old rust-pocked Ford tractor, looking like the fossil of some prehistoric beast. It was a place of ghosts, of work long since finished. I started my search, guided by the cryptic words of the letter. The heart of this place is in the work. What did that even mean? I ran my hands over the old tools hanging on the walls. Saws, hammers, wrenches, all coated in a layer of rust and grime. I kicked over old feed bags, poked through empty stalls. Nothing. I climbed the rickety ladder to the hayloft, the rungs groaning under my weight. The loft was filled with decaying bales of hay, their sweet, musty scent thick in the air. I spent an hour up there, pulling bales apart, searching in corners, finding nothing but spiders and mouse droppings. Defeated again, I slid down the ladder and landed heavily on the dirt floor. I leaned against the cold metal of the old tractor, the frustration a bitter taste in my mouth. This was a fool's errand, a wild goose chase designed by a dead man. I looked at the tractor, at its huge, weathered tires and faded blue paint. I remembered riding on my grandfather's lap as a little boy, his big hands guiding mine on the steering wheel as we bounced across the fields. It was one of the few good memories I had left, a small, warm ember in the cold ash of my past. On impulse, I hoisted myself into the driver's seat. The leather was cracked and cold. The steering wheel was smooth from years of use. My hands fit perfectly into the worn grooves. I looked at the dashboard, at the faded gauges and stiff levers, and then I saw it. Tucked up under the dash, almost completely hidden in the shadows, was a small, metal lockbox, bolted to the frame. It was the kind of box you'd use to keep a firearm or important papers in a vehicle. It had a simple combination lock. My heart started to pound. This had to be it. I tried the obvious combinations, birthdays, dates, nothing. I thought for a moment, trying to remember anything significant. A number, a date, and then it came to me, the number on my grandfather's old cattle brand, a symbol he'd designed himself, a lazy A, a V, and a number. 721. I clicked the dials. 7, 2, 1. I pulled the latch. It opened with a soft click. Inside, there were two things. The first was a thick stack of $100 bills, held together by a brittle rubber band. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It had to be thousands of dollars. Enough to get a new start, to disappear, to leave this cold, haunted place behind forever. My breath caught in my throat. This was a way out. A real way out. Beneath the money was a large, sealed envelope. It was addressed to me. Leo, for when you're ready. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pick it up. The money was a ticket to freedom, but this envelope felt like the truth. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that whatever was inside this envelope would change everything. It was the choice my grandfather had written about. I could take the money and run, leave the ghosts of the Vance Ranch behind me, or I could open this letter and face whatever truth, whatever poison lay inside. I sat there in the cold, silent barn, holding a fortune in one hand and a reckoning in the other, and I had no idea what to do. The weight of it all was crushing. I sat there for what felt like an hour, the cold of the tractor seat seeping into my bones, the stack of cash feeling both impossibly heavy and ridiculously light in my hand. It was an escape, a clean break. I could walk away from Redemption, Wyoming, from the name Vance, from the whispers and stares that had followed me my whole life. I could go somewhere warm, find a cheap apartment, get a job that didn't require a background check, and just be anonymous. It was everything I thought I wanted, but my eyes kept drifting to the other envelope. For when you're ready. Was I ready? Ready for what? More lies? More half-truths? The first letter had promised an explanation. This one felt different. It felt like a verdict. My fingers traced the outline of the cash. It was real. It was tangible. It was a solution. The letter was just paper and ink, words. Words had only ever brought me pain. The words of the prosecutor, the words of the judge, the whispers of the other boys at Northwood. Words were weapons. Money was a shield. I stood up, stuffing the cash deep into the pocket of my jacket. I left the envelope in the lockbox. I'll come back for it later, I told myself. Or maybe I won't. Maybe I'll just leave it here, a secret for the dust and the mice. I walked out of the barn and back toward the house, my mind racing. I needed a plan. First things first. I needed to get to a real town, a place with a bank, a place where I could buy a decent coat and a hot meal that wasn't a decade old. Back in the house, I started looking for practical things. a bag, something to carry my meager possessions. In the closet of the spare bedroom, I found an old canvas duffel bag. As I pulled it down from the shelf, a small, leather-bound book fell to the floor with a soft thud. It was a journal. The cover was blank. I opened it. The first page had a date from just over 2 years ago, right after the fire. It was my grandfather's handwriting again, but this time it was different, messier, angrier. "They took him today," the entry began. "The state, they put my grandson in cuffs and took him away, said he was a danger, a delinquent. They didn't listen, no one listened. They looked at a scared, broken boy, covered in soot and tears, and they saw a monster. They didn't see the truth, they didn't want to, it was easier to blame a child." I sank onto the floor, the duffel bag forgotten. I read on, my hands trembling. Page after page detailed his fight. His meetings with lawyers who told him it was a lost cause. His attempts to talk to social workers who saw him as an unfit, grieving old man. He wrote about selling off cattle, piece by piece, to pay legal fees. He wrote about the town turning against him, against the name Vance. The whispers, the accusations. He wasn't silent. He was screaming, and no one was listening. He described visiting me in the initial detention center, how I wouldn't look at him, wouldn't speak to him, how I just stared at the wall, catatonic with shock and grief, and how a state-appointed psychologist told him his presence was detrimental to the subject's emotional state. They told him to stay away. They legally barred him from contacting me. They told him it was for my own good. The words blurred through my tears. The anger I had nurtured for 2 years, the solid, righteous anger that had been my only companion, began to crumble, turning into a hollow, aching grief. He hadn't abandoned me. He'd been pushed away. He'd been fighting for me, from the outside, in a battle he was destined to lose. I found the last entry, dated a little over a year ago. The handwriting was faint, barely legible. "The doctors say it's the cancer, that it's in my bones now. Not much time left. I failed him. I couldn't get him out. I couldn't clear his name. All I have left is this place, the land. There's a developer sniffing around, offering a fortune for it. A man named Thorne. Says they want to build a resort. That money could set Leo up for life. Give him a clean slate somewhere else, but it feels like selling my soul. This land is all we have left. It's the only proof we were ever here. I have to make a choice for him. I just pray to God it's the right one." That's when it all clicked into place. The money in the barn, the letters, the deed. He hadn't left me a simple inheritance. He'd left me the choice he couldn't make. Sell the ranch and run, or stay and fight for the name he'd tried so hard to protect. The weight on my shoulders wasn't just my own anymore. It was his too. I closed the journal and placed it gently in the duffel bag. My plan to run felt cheap and cowardly now. I walked back out into the snow, my purpose clear. I went to the barn, to the old tractor, and I opened the lockbox again. I took out the thick envelope and carried it back to the house, to my grandfather's study. I sat in his worn leather chair, the chair that had seemed so cold and alien to me just the day before. Now, it felt like an embrace. I used the silver Zippo to light an old kerosene lamp I'd found on the mantel, its steady golden light pushing back the shadows. Then, with a deep breath, I broke the seal on the envelope. Inside were several documents. The first was a formal typed letter from a law firm, Thorne Development and Acquisitions. It was a purchase offer for the Vance Ranch. The number made my head spin. It was 7 figures, enough to never have to worry about money again. It was a king's ransom. The offer was dated last year, and it noted it was a standing offer, valid for 5 years. Attached was the business card of a lawyer named Alistair Thorne. Beneath the offer was another letter, this one handwritten. My grandfather's final message. "Leo," it started. "If you're reading this, it means you chose to look for the truth instead of taking the easy way out. I am so proud of you. I knew you had that strength in you. Now you need to know everything. The fire, it wasn't your fault. It was never your fault." My breath hitched. I had to read that line again. I had spent 2 years believing I was guilty. I had been playing with matches in the hayloft, a stupid, reckless kid's game. I'd dropped one. I remembered the panic, the whoosh of the flames, the smoke. I remembered running. My confession had been a blur of terror and guilt, coerced by stern-faced men who told me it would be easier if I just told the truth. I had confessed to starting it. "You dropped a match, son," the letter continued. "But that little match didn't cause the inferno that burned down that barn and took your parents. The wiring in that old barn was faulty. I knew it was. I'd been meaning to fix it for years, but I was stubborn and cheap. The county fire marshal knew it, too. He owed me a favor, and he was friends with your father. When the official investigation started, he saw how it was going to go. They were going to blame you. A 14-year-old kid, a tragic accident. Case closed. But if the real cause came out, faulty wiring I'd been cited for before, it would have been negligence. Criminal negligence. I would have gone to prison. The insurance wouldn't have paid out a dime. Your parents' life insurance, everything, would have been tied up in lawsuits for years. You would have been left with nothing, a ward of the state with a father in jail and a dead mother. So I made a deal with him. He would bury the official report about the wiring. He'd list the cause as undetermined, but let the unofficial story, the one about you and the matches, become the truth. It protected you from any legal liability, and it made sure the insurance paid out. The money from that policy is what I've been living on, what I used to pay the lawyers, what I used to keep this ranch from being seized by the banks. I let the whole world, and you, believe you were responsible. I sacrificed your name to save your future. It was the worst decision of my life, and I have regretted it every single day since. I am so sorry." I was sobbing now, great, heaving gasps that tore through my chest. The guilt I had carried, the heavy, suffocating cloak of it was lifting. It wasn't me. It wasn't my fault. The relief was so immense it was painful, an agony of release, but it was tangled with a fresh wave of anger. Not at my grandfather, but at the system, at the lies, at the injustice of it all. The letter wasn't finished. In this envelope, you will find a copy of the original, suppressed fire marshal's report. He gave it to me before he retired. It's proof. You will also find the contact information for a lawyer in town, a man named Robert Davies. He's the only person in this valley I trust. He knows some of the story, but not all of it. He can help you understand the offer from Thorne. They don't just want the land, Leo, they want the water rights. Our creek is one of the last independent water sources in the county. It's worth more than the land itself. That's the real prize. The choice is still yours. You can take this proof, clear your name, and sell this place to Thorne. No one would blame you. You can walk away with a clear conscience and a full bank account, or you can stay, you can fight. You can make this place live again. You can restore the name Vance not by clearing it in a courtroom, but by living it with honor on this land. The money I left you in the tractor is enough to pay the back taxes and get you through the winter. It's not much, but it's a start. The rest is up to you. Whatever you choose, know that I love you. Your grandfather, Arthur. I sat there in the golden lamplight. The truth laid bare in front of me. He hadn't just left me a choice between money and morality. He had given me back my own life. He had given me back my innocence. The question was no longer what I should do. The question was, who was I going to be? The boy who ran or the man who stayed? The weight was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer the dead weight of the past. It was the living weight of the future, and for the first time in a very long time I felt strong enough to carry it. I want to pause here for a second, because maybe you've had a moment like this. A moment where the story you were told about your life, the story you told yourself, was ripped away and replaced with a harder, more complicated truth. A moment where you were holding two futures in your hands, one easy and one right. If you're nodding your head right now, I see you. This community is for you. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to make a choice that redefined who you are. Your story matters. Now, let's get back to that cold study in Wyoming and the choice I had to make. The next morning, Christmas Day, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The grief was still there, a dull ache beneath my ribs, but the confusion and anger had been replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I made a fire in the hearth, using pages from an old, water-damaged book for kindling. The warmth slowly pushed back the oppressive chill, and for the first time, the house began to feel less like a tomb and more like a shelter. I found the phone number for the lawyer, Robert Davies, in my grandfather's journal. I walked the 3 miles back into town, the documents and the cash tucked safely in my duffel bag. The town of Redemption was even quieter than it had been on Christmas Eve. A few houses had lights on, wreaths on their doors, but the streets were empty. I found a payphone outside the general store, a relic that, thankfully, still worked. A woman answered the phone, her voice warm. I asked for Mr. Davies, explaining that it was about Arthur Vance's estate. She sounded surprised, but told me to hold on. A moment later, a man's voice, calm and measured, came on the line. "This is Robert Davies." I introduced myself. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Leo," he finally said, his voice softer now. "Your grandfather told me you might call one day. He left a file with me. I'm in my office now, just down the street. The brick building with the green door. Can you meet me there in 10 minutes? His office was small and cluttered, filled with stacks of books and legal files. It smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco. Mr. Davies was a man in his late 60s with kind eyes and a weary slump to his shoulders. He didn't offer platitudes or false sympathy. He just shook my hand and pointed to a chair. "Arthur was a good man," he said, sitting down behind his massive oak desk. "Stubborn as a mule, but a good man. He told me the basics. That there was an offer on the ranch and that he was leaving the final decision to you. He also told me he was trying to protect you." I slid the envelope across the desk. "He did more than that," I said, my voice hoarse. "He left me the truth." Mr. Davies spent the next hour reading everything, the letters, the suppressed fire marshal's report. His expression shifted from weary sadness to a sharp, focused anger. He read the report twice, his lips a thin, tight line. When he finally looked up at me, his eyes were blazing. "This is criminal," he said, his voice a low growl. "The deals that get made in the dark in these small towns. I knew something about the fire never sat right. Arthur mortgaged this ranch to the hilt fighting for you. Did you know that? He sold off nearly everything but the land itself. Thorne Development knew he was desperate. They've been circling this valley for years, buying up distressed properties, trying to get a monopoly on the water rights. Your grandfather's ranch is the key. It has the primary aquifer access for the whole region." He leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. "Leo, you're holding a royal flush. This report is dynamite. You could sue the county, the fire marshal's office. You could make them pay for what they did to you, for the years you lost. I don't want their money. I said, the words coming out with a certainty that surprised me. I just want my name back, and I want to keep my ranch. A slow smile spread across Davy's face. Arthur would have liked to hear you say that. He was so afraid you'd take the developer's money and run. He said he wouldn't. Blame you if you did, but he was hoping you'd stay. Thorn Development, they still want it? I asked. They've been calling me once a month since Arthur passed, he confirmed. The offer still stands. In fact, they'll probably raise it now that there's a new owner. They'll see a young kid, just out of the system, with a dilapidated property and no money. They'll think you're an easy target. What do I need to do? First, we pay the back taxes. The money Arthur left you should be more than enough. That will get the county off your back. Second, we file a motion to have your juvenile record formally expunged, using this report as evidence. It'll be a fight, but it's a fight we can win. Third, he picked up the business card for Alistair Thorne. You need to tell this man to go to hell. I took the card. The thought of confronting this faceless corporation, this man who saw my home as nothing more than a number on a spreadsheet, sent a tremor of fear through me. But it was overshadowed by a stronger feeling, the feeling of my grandfather's hand on my shoulder. I used the phone in Davy's office. A crisp, professional voice answered. Thorn Development, Alistair Thorne's office. I asked to speak with him, giving my name and identifying myself as the new owner of the Vance Ranch. I was put on hold for less than a minute. Mr. Vance. Thorne's voice was smooth, slick, like oil on water. My sincerest condolences on the loss of your grandfather. I trust you've had a chance to review the generous offer we made for his property. Given your circumstances, I'm sure you'll find it to be a very attractive solution, a chance for a fresh start. He knew. Of course he knew. He'd done his research. He saw me as a problem that could be solved with money. I've reviewed your offer, Mr. Thorne, I said, my voice steady, echoing Davy's earlier words. And my answer is no. There was a moment of surprised silence. I may not have been clear, he said, his tone shifting, a hint of steel beneath the silk. We are prepared to be quite generous. Perhaps we could even increase the offer slightly to help you with your transition. The ranch is not for sale, I said, each word a stone being laid in the foundation of my new life. Not now. Not ever. Please don't contact me again. You're making a mistake, son, he hissed, the politeness gone completely. That place is a ruin. It'll bury you in debt. You have no idea what you're getting into. Maybe not, I said, looking at Mr. Davies, who was giving me a thumbs up. But it's my ruin. Goodbye, Mr. Thorne. I hung up the phone. The click of the receiver felt as final and as loud as the gate of Northwood slamming shut. But this time, I was on the right side of the door. The next few months were the hardest of my life. Winter in Wyoming is a brutal, relentless thing. The money from my grandfather covered the taxes and bought me a used generator, a space heater, and enough supplies to last until the thaw. Every day was a battle. I patched the roof, insulated the windows, and chopped wood until my hands were a mess of blisters and calluses. I lived on canned soup and coffee. I was lonely, I was cold, and I had never felt more alive. Mr. Davies was true to his word. He filed the motions. The county fought back, of course. They tried to bury it, to claim the report was a forgery. But the truth, once it's out, has a way of finding the light. The local paper got wind of the story. A young man, wrongly blamed for a fire that killed his parents, now fighting to save his family's legacy. People in town started to look at me differently. The suspicion in their eyes was replaced by a grudging respect, and in some, even sympathy. One day, the waitress from the diner, A young woman named Sarah, whose grandfather had been friends with mine, showed up at the ranch with a truck full of groceries and a hot casserole. "The whole town chipped in," she said, avoiding my eyes. We're sorry for how your family was treated." It was the first time anyone had apologized. I almost broke down right there on the porch. Spring came slowly, then all at once. The snow melted, revealing the green shoots of new life. The creek began to flow again, a clear, cold artery bringing life back to the land. I used the last of my grandfather's money to buy some old used fencing equipment. The fences were the first thing that needed to be fixed. It was back-breaking work, digging post holes in the rocky soil, stretching wire until my muscles screamed. One afternoon, as I was working on a long stretch of fence line near the road, a sleek black car pulled up. Alistair Thorne got out. He was exactly as I'd pictured him. Expensive suit, polished shoes, a predatory smile. "Quite the project you've taken on," he said, gesturing at the dilapidated ranch. "My offer is still on the table, Vance. I'll even double it. Think about it. No more of this manual labor. You could be on a beach somewhere." I didn't stop working. I just lifted another post and slammed it into the hole. "I told you," I said, not looking at him. "It's not for sale." "Every man has a price, kid." I finally stopped and turned to face him. I wiped the sweat from my brow with the back of a dirty glove. "My grandfather already paid the price for this land, Mr. Thorne. I'm just paying the interest." He stared at me for a long moment, his smile gone. He saw the truth in my eyes. This wasn't a negotiation. He shook his head, a look of genuine disbelief on his face, got back in his car, and drove away. I never saw him again. That evening, I sat on the porch steps, watching the sunset behind the mountains. The sky was ablaze with orange and purple. The house behind me was still a wreck, the barn still sagged, and the fields were still overgrown. There were years of work ahead of me. I was broke, I was tired, and I was still haunted by the ghosts of my past. But for the first time, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel since I was a little boy. I felt peace. I hadn't just inherited a piece of land. I had inherited a legacy of resilience, a story of sacrifice. My grandfather didn't leave me a fortune. He left me a purpose. He didn't give me an easy life. He gave me a life worth fighting for. The ranch wasn't my miracle because it was valuable. It was my miracle because it was mine. It was the place where I stopped being a victim of my story and started being the author of it. Home isn't always a place you're given. Sometimes it's a place you have to build, post by painful post, nail by bloody nail. It's the hard, beautiful work of taking a ruin and finding a reason to make it whole again. It's about choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. Not because anyone is watching, but because it's the only way to truly save yourself. This journey, my journey, is far from over. There are fences to mend and fields to plow. There are scars on this land and there are scars on me, but every sunrise feels like a promise, and every sunset feels like a benediction. I am Leo Vance, and this is my home. This is my redemption. And that's the story of how a broken-down ranch saved my life. Maybe you have a story like that too. A story about finding your home in the most unexpected place, about rebuilding your life from the ground up. If this story meant something to you, if it resonated with that part of you that knows about hard choices and second chances, then I hope you'll subscribe and become part of this community. We're all just trying to find our way home. Share your story in the comments below. I read every one, because every story of survival is a miracle, and every voice deserves to be heard. Thank you for listening.